Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. Ben Kinsley is here as a co-producer and co-host. Ben, welcome.
Thank you.
And our two excellent guests tonight are Hugh Bradshaw, who is the Employment Services Manager, and Nat Piper, who is Business Account Manager, both of whom work for Voc Rehab in the state. Welcome, gentlemen.
Nice to see you, Pat.
Good to see you, Pat.
We're long
Ben.
time buddies.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Been knowing each other for a lot of years.
that's
when
right.
Nat walked in, I went, "Hey, I know you."
Yeah.
So we start off with asking you to talk a little bit about yourselves before we get into the nitty gritty.
Sure. So again, my name is Hugh Bradshaw. I'm the Employment Services Manager. And I've been with Voc Rehab for about 11 years. And prior to that, I was the Executive Director of the Vermont Association of Business, Industry, and Rehabilitation, otherwise known as VABR.
Right.
And prior to coming into Human Services, I was actually, my background was really in sales and marketing and in the private sector
Right.
as a business owner and working as a distributor for a large distributor here in the state.
Great.
So it's informed a lot of my work for Voc Rehab
think
is
so.
that connection to the business community, which
Yeah.
is really key.
And an understanding of how it works.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good thing, Nat.
My name's Nat Piper. I'm a business account manager with Voc Rehab Vermont in the Barrie office. Much like you, I spent 20 years in sales and marketing, which helped, again, inform the work. And I spent the last 10 years in human services.
Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. See? Got the red questions there.
So, Hugh, could you give us a little bit of an overview of what the Vermont division of Voc Rehab is and kind of what some of the funding streams are? How the
Sure,
organization
absolutely.
functions? Yeah.
So Voc Rehab Vermont is a 80-20 federally funded program, so it's actually 79 or whatever the numbers
Right.
are, but 80-20
Yeah.
is easier to say.
Yeah.
And we are, our sole mission is to help Vermonters with disabilities to secure employment. So we do that in a variety of ways. We can help people with training and education, credentialing, anything that the person needs to move forward in their career. And then we also have folks like Nat who are in the field talking to businesses every day, making those connections with business, and then we connect our candidates to those businesses based on their skills and where the matches are with the business community.
So you're really working both sides of it, both, getting, the folks with disabilities who are looking for employment, getting them the skills and training that they need, and then also on the other side working with
Right.
businesses and giving them the education and stuff. to
Yeah,
make those
actually,
connections.
that's an interesting point because this is something relatively new in the
Right.
VR world, is what we call a dual customer approach. So for years, obviously, VR programs across the country saw individuals with disabilities as their customer and they served them really well. But there was a growing recognition that without employers on the other side of the equation, you
Right.
really don't have those job matches. So we began probably 9 years ago to really look at this dual customer model and think strategically about how are we serving businesses, how do we improve our outreach and our coordination with businesses. And that was really the birth at that time of looking at the dual customer approach, is when we started talking about having business account managers who are solely responsible for that business outreach. They don't carry caseloads.
That's great.
They're really doing pure business outreach every day.
Yeah. And that you told me that you used to have caseloads back
When I
back a while,
first-
but with this new assignment now to working with employers.
Yes, when I first came on board, I had a caseload.
Yeah.
I had the caseload for about a year and a half, and when I transitioned to business account management,
Right.
that caseload disappears because the
Right.
business community is now your top priority.
Right.
Gaining an understanding of what the
Well,
labor market needs.
That's great, and we know from listening to the governor that we need workers, and
Oh,
there
boy,
they
do we.
are.
We do.
And they are very eager. The shows we've done on disabilities, these people really want to work and want to contribute and feel like a viable member of the community. So that's a very
Absolutely.
good thing. So tonight we're talking about two things. One's called the Progressive Employment Model, and the second is called the Creative Workforce Solutions. And I think I told you before the show, I was at an event last night and I mentioned it to somebody who works at Special Olympics, and I sent them the link, and they were very excited to.
Super.
And the host of the event, which you know, Holly
Yes, indeed.
Chase, who and you said you volunteered for Special
I
Olympics.
did last year. I spent some time there supporting some skiers. It was a blast.
Awesome.
Blast.
That's great.
Yeah, had a
Good
great
for-
time.
That's great. Well, we had a show with Sue Minter when she took the job. I'm sorry to hear she left, but that was a great show because I had no idea how much the Olympics,
Oh, yeah. It's quite a
Special
program.
Olympics do. Anyway, we're back to the topic. So I did a lot of reading on your website and a lot of articles that have been written. So could you tell us what these two models are, what's their, you know, their guiding principles and how they interact, because it seems to me that at some point they must interact somewhere.
Sure.
Because they're very similar, but yet a little different. So.
Yeah, and both were developed around the same time. So this was at the tail end of the economic downturn in 09 and 10.
Yeah.
And really, it was, again, driven by this dual customer conversation that we were having. And we talked about how do we serve our customers who have disabilities better, and how do we serve the business community better? And from that, two things emerged. One was the business account managers and the notion of creative workforce solutions. And the other was the progressive employment model, because we knew employers had some fears around hiring people with disabilities, and we wanted to knock some of those fears down. So I'll start with creative workforce solutions, just as a quick overview. We can get into more detail, and Nat can fill in the blanks. But essentially, we recognize in the Agency of Human Services, this was back during the Challenges for Change conversations.
Oh yes, I
around
remember that
making
well.
state government more efficient. And we weren't under the auspices of the Challenges for Change discussions, but we were approached by Rob Hoffman at the time, who was the
right.
Secretary of the Agency of Human Services, and he asked the question, the agency funds a lot of different employment programs across the state for a variety of populations who have barriers to employment. So not just folks with disabilities,
Right.
but you have the TANF, the Reach Up program,
That's
and
right.
others. And his question was, could we do it more effectively? And my director, Diane Dalmas, and I had been having these conversations, and we really felt that the Agency of Human Services needed some kind of collaborative model that brought everybody to the table, because historically what was happening was AHS was funding all of these programs at the local level, and they were in fact competing with each other
Yeah,
for
I heard
employment.
that. Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
I've heard that too.
And so
Exactly.
the challenge with that is, so I have a relationship with you as an employer, you give me a job opening, and if I have no one on my caseload, the lead used to die there. In other words, I wasn't sharing that anywhere else
Right,
because I was
right.
protecting my relationship with you.
Right.
When in fact, we may have had candidates in other programs that would be a good match. And the
wow.
business doesn't care where that good
Sure.
employee comes from,
Right.
right? So we made the argument that we really needed to pull those various employment programs together
Good for
under
you.
one umbrella, which was indeed Creative
Right.
Workforce Solutions.
Right.
So the way it looks now is all of the business account managers facilitate a local CWS employment team that is made up of all those various employment programs. And it's
Okay,
wide-ranging now, a lot of folks under the big tent, as we say.
Outside of the agency too? Like
Yes.
the Department of Labor I might throw in?
We have
since I know
Department of
nothing?
Labor at the table,
Good.
we have refugee programs at the
Good.
table, we have, it's amazing how many employment programs are out there
Oh,
hidden
please,
in these
that was
different
one
things.
of my big things when I was working. as
Yeah,
a
it's
government.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So even housing programs have an employment component, for instance. The Reach Up program obviously has an employment component to it. So we pull these folks together, and the beauty of it is you have a very organic sharing of what's out there, who's hiring, who has contacts, who has a relationship, and sometimes it's even problem solving. I have a tough case, I've hit the wall, I don't know what to do, and you have
Right.
this kind of natural
Right.
peer support to figure
Right,
it out.
great.
So that's the CWS side. We can talk more about that. Progressive employment was really getting at fear, the underlying fear that employers have around considering candidates with disabilities, or in fact other people with other barriers to employment. And so we began to talk about how does the staffing industry do this? And the staffing industry for years has had what they call temp to perm.
Right,
So they place
sure,
a
right.
permanent person in a job in a temporary position. The employer gets to see if it's a fit, they
Yeah,
can see if they have
right.
the skills, and when it looks like the right match, they convert them over to regular employment.
Right.
Well, we said, why shouldn't we just replicate that, but do it under the auspices of state government?
Right,
And so progressive employment was born, and the difference here is that the business is not putting the person on payroll, so we pay a person what we call a training offset for their time in that business, but it's really about leveraging a current reference, some new experience to
Right.
build some skills,
Right.
or to show that you're a good fit for the company.
Right.
And this was based on conversations we had with employers who said, if you give me somebody for 4 to 6 weeks, I can tell you if they're a match. I can tell you if they're going to work out for my business. So we said, okay,
Right.
4 to 6 weeks it is.
Right.
And so we built this model. It's very flexible. We can have a very open conversation with an employer about what do you need,
Great.
how much time do we need. These are usually part-time training opportunities, usually about 20 hours a week, and we have leveraged hundreds of people into
That's great.
employment.
What is the responsibility of the employer when the employee comes to work? Do they have them shadowed, or
Great question.
Yeah.
So one thing we're very clear with employers is this is not about taking a person and putting them on a line and then they're filling a need and just making widgets on the line.
Right.
This is very strategic in nature. We talk about what skills need to be developed or what skills we want them to be assessing.
Right.
And we want them under supervision of a supervisor the whole time. So it's not just throwing
Oh,
somebody on
okay.
a production
Right,
line
sure.
and having them do the work.
Right.
It's really about building those skills. And it's really in 3 realms. So you have the assessment realm. We want to find out if a person has the skills to be able to be competitive in that particular position. It's about building skills. So can we put somebody in who has most of the skills but needs a little more development, let's say.
Right.
And then the last one is really straight into employment. We want to use this as an entree directly to employment. So the employer sees the good worker, they say, great, we have a match, and we convert it to a regular employee.
And they know they're ready, as you put down here, they're ready to work. Because they already have
Absolutely.
assessed their skills and their skill levels.
Yeah, the biggest barrier to folks with disabilities to getting into employment is actually perceptions on the part
Right.
of employers and others out in the community.
I know one of the things we heard when I worked in the Department of Labor is we don't have enough people, we don't have the time to stop and help the new employee.
Yes.
But this kind of sneaks them in. I mean, they kind of graduated, so
Well, and the beauty of this is
they can work at their
they're-
own speed probably.
They can, and again, remembering they're not on payroll, so they're
Right.
they're not dragging you down by
Right.
you're paying them a
Right.
wage.
So are you paying them? Or
We
they
pay
get-
them a
yeah.
training offset
Oh,
during their
excellent.
time. So it's
Right.
really to offset their cost of getting to.
Right.
And we explain this to our customers, our candidates as well, that this is no different than sending you to the tech center for a welding class. The difference is that the instructor
You're
is the
right there.
employer.
Right.
Right.
And your lab is
Right.
in the work site.
Right.
site.
You know, that's actually, I'm sorry, not sticking to the questions, but when I went to the weekend college to get my degree, and because I was working, because I went to college right after school, and it just wasn't,
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
for me. But when I went to the weekend college, because I went back to my workplace, I saw what they were teaching me and how it was applied, and I got it, because I could see why we were learning
Absolutely.
all this stuff I didn't understand last time. Like, why do I need to know this stuff? Or you go back to work, so they will be in the setting, and it'll
Absolutely.
help them relate.
Well, to the
Yeah.
point, if you have an employer, obviously, that wants to have someone demonstrate a skill and have that skill assessed, it also works the same way for an individual who's managing an aspect of disability, and maybe they're even unsure, do I have the stamina? Is this the right environment for me?
Right.
Yeah.
Does the schedule work for me? So it's an opportunity for both customers, if you will, the VR customer and the business customer, to make some mutual decisions about, is this the right fit? And like any employee that you have on your team, there's always some level of accommodation, whether it's around scheduling, whether it's around preferred work styles, open spaces, closed spaces, et cetera.
Do any of your clients have an assistant that goes with them? I know Max Barrow and
Oh,
Sterling
sure.
People, they have somebody that drives them, somebody that stays with them during work to kind of translate some things if it's, so they also have, maybe
it-
have somebody to help them.
Yeah, it varies by individual and what
Right.
services are available through their program. So
Yeah.
Max is supported, for instance, through a supported employment
Right,
program.
yeah.
But we also have now, very recently, added job coaches to the VR
excellent.
staff
Oh,
so that they can
excellent.
actually do,
'Cause I know-
particularly early on, that's the toughest part for a new job, and anybody can attest to this, not just people with disabilities. That first few weeks is really tough. You're kind of getting your feet underneath you, trying to figure your way around, so we
Right.
can offer those supports short-term for
Right.
folks, absolutely.
Because I know they tried to cut that funding. I wrote a lot of letters about that one last year. I was not too
Indeed.
quiet, I'm sure you're shocked.
I think
But I wasn't-
other people spoke up as well, I
Exactly.
believe.
What a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Well, so one of the things, it's kind of a two-part question. One of the things I'd heard recently was about this program was that you're looking for meaningful employment. It's not just,
Right.
you know, find something for someone to do, and you know, like stuffing. I think the analogy was stuffing envelopes in the mailroom, right? Find something that's meaningful for them to do. That's an actual job, and not just busy work. It's, you know, meaningful that they're contributing.
Absolutely, and you know, it's interesting, so Vermont was one of the first states to
Yes.
abolish the workshop model
Very proud of
for
us.
people with developmental disabilities. So the old model was you would go to a segregated setting with other individuals with
Right.
disabilities, and you'd be doing that kind of piecework.
Right, putting the buttons on the
small
piece of card or
piecework.
something.
And you know, to Vermont's credit, we got rid of that model years
Yeah.
ago and really moved, as well as closing down the state hospital, and moved people to community integration and integrated work settings, putting people into work settings. And this is where those job coaches that you described were critical, right? So
Right.
an individual can go to a workplace and have that support with them in a real job, in a real setting, that's not sitting in a room with
Right.
other folks with similar disabilities. So it's quite a leap that we've made here in Vermont, and many other states now are following. There've been a lot of Olmsted decisions around this as well.
I know we're running. I met a woman in a funeral I went to in Tarrytown, and it was an older woman with a daughter with a disability. And I was so upset with the conversation because she was treating this young woman not as I would have treated her, or know that anybody in Vermont would have treated her. And I think I came back here and I was I was so upset because you could see in the woman's face that she was trying to talk to me and trying to communicate, and Mom wasn't letting it happen. And she kept hoping that she could get a job in one of those places. It would give her something to do during the day, and I'm sitting there going,
Yeah,
shut your mouth,
that's
shut
not
your
a,
mouth.
that's not a great aspiration.
No,
right?
exactly, to have your daughter
I
sitting
mean,
there.
philosophically, the VR program in Vermont, we firmly believe that with the right supports, anyone can work in the state
Right,
of Vermont in
right.
competitive employment. And the right supports being the key term, right? So whether it's a
Yeah.
job coach or accommodations or assistive technology or whatever the case may
Right.
be, with the right supports, anyone can succeed in
Great.
work, which
That's
is
great.
To
really
Hugh's
important.
point, if I just may, the levels of disability vary from individual to individual. So the supports are case
Right.
by case. So one individual may benefit from having a job coach on site. There's another individual that does not require that job coach, or a coach may fade out. As I was telling Pat earlier, when I had a caseload, I was always blown away by the educational attainment levels. We had some great guys that were just going after their GED for the first time. I had some PhDs that were in there, and all the educational attainment in between, work experiences in between. As I was telling Pat, it's literally every Vermonter that you
Right,
get to meet when
right.
you're working with these caseloads.
That's great.
So yeah, it's very diverse.
How are the employers reacting to you when you come into their office and say, here's what I want to do? Do they get it?
I think so, because when we look at the employer model, what we're talking to, because we've had sales and marketing, we say we want to get to what's important to them. We want to assist the employers with recruitment, with training, and retention. Those are
Right.
the big three. And so we do that by getting to know their business as well as we possibly can, knowing what the base skills are, what the goals are, to the point of meaningful work, what the career ladders look like.
Right.
And what does it take when you hire somebody on, anybody, not just a Vermonter with disability, any Vermonter, when they start in your business, what's that look like? The more we understand that, the more we can bring that back to the table, to the team members that have the caseloads, and start discussing what we've uncovered. Whether it's, hey, the base skill for this job is 8th grade level math, or collegiate math, whatever it is, that's fine. We need to know what it is. Once we start doing that, you start making really good matches, and then the conversation around disability, quite frankly, because
Goes
you're now
away.
skill-based, it goes away. It just goes away. So businesses, if you're approaching it from what's important to them, which is true workforce development, then the conversation of disability, it's really not an issue.
That's great.
It's more skill-based, getting things done, and identifying upfront what level, if any, supports are required. Because quite frankly, one of my favorites, Hugh and I were in a warehouse a number of years ago, and the warehouse employed, oh gosh, it was a touch over 100. And statistically, you're going to have close to 1 out of 5 of your workers is managing some aspect of disability, disclosed or not. And so you already have folks on your team that are productive, coming in every day, doing a great job, that are managing an aspect of disability. Let's stop talking about that. Let's start talking about getting work done.
Yeah, and I think
Love it.
Yeah.
I think one of the things too, you're right. It's getting over that initial hurdle.
bet.
You want to bring someone who, has a disability onto the team, and the reality is they probably have people that are managing things
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
depression
Right.
or
You just
whatever
don't
that
talk
are,
about
that are
it.
already on,
Yep.
that are already working for the company, and they're just we may not forward about it, or it's not out there, or they're not approaching it in the same way as someone who.
And
you know.
there's an element of, I hate to use the word risk, but if you're a business owner and you hire anybody today, there's an element of trying to get to know this individual, et cetera. With the program that we offer, you have a chance to really get to know the individual, and the individual really gets to know you, so that when they are on the payroll, competitive and doing the work, they can move pretty quick, because they've already been through all the steps of getting to know the team, understanding the skills, understanding the hours involved in all of that.
And the culture.
And the culture, which is huge.
Because you can have the skill set, but the culture may not be a fit.
Might not be a good fit at
Absolutely,
all.
and that's
right.
the beauty of progressive employment is you both get to test that out and see
Yeah.
if it's a fit. Are you getting along with coworkers? Is it a good environment for you? Is it all a match? And it's interesting you mentioned this. In some respects, employers are already doing this work; they just don't know it.
They just
right?
don't
so
know it, yeah.
you talk about accommodations to an employer, and they begin to say, "Whoa, accommodations!" In reality, they make accommodations every day for
Right,
their
for
employees.
sure.
Coming in a little bit later, you got a doctor's appointment, fine. Coming in an hour late, they make these accommodations every day. They just don't call it accommodations.
Right.
Do you
Absolutely.
find that do you work with the employees of the company to talk about hiring people with disabilities so that they give the person a break and don't do a I hope I'm not.
No, this
don't
is
do
a
that.
really.
I see you and I immediately think
Yeah.
one thing and it's
No,
not.
it's very interesting. We rarely do that
Really?
because where you really get that aha moment on the part of other staff is when you put a person with a disability in the workplace.
Yeah.
So it's
they watch
interesting
them
when
work and-
Yeah.
when we first
Good.
started about progressive employment, I felt very strongly about this because we had been doing disability etiquette and disability awareness workshops for employers. And all that was happening is they would glaze over, and we would never
Right.
get any hires out
Yeah.
of it. They would just sort of go to hear
Right.
the news and then leave. And I made the argument that the best disability awareness tool in the world is to take a person with a disability and put them into the workplace.
Right,
Yeah.
Right.
right.
That's
Bring 'em
when
on
people
board.
are like,
Bring
oh,
them
I
on.
get this.
Right.
This isn't so
Yeah.
scary. And oh, by the way, they come into work on time, unlike half of my employees.
Right.
They do the work with a
don't get
smile
sick,
on their
right?
face,
Yeah, right.
unlike half of my
Yeah.
employees.
Yep.
And everyone loves working with them.
Right.
So we oftentimes see the employer have these real aha moments to the point where now our phones are ringing off the hook.
Oh, I'm
With
so
we want
proud
more
of you
folks.
guys.
We want more
Good.
folks, so we're
Yeah.
looking for more
Excellent.
workers. Unfortunately, in this labor market, the labor pool is pretty tight.
Right.
It's really tight,
Right.
and so this is where we begun to talk about not just jobs but careers. Can we help a person? Now, granted, some folks we need to get them a job tomorrow because they need to pay the rent and stabilize financially. But we're also having that conversation about what are your real aspirations? Where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And how do we help you get there incrementally?
Right.
Well, you hear stories. I'm a Facebook addict, and a woman with disability opened up a bakery,
Sure.
and only hired people with disabilities, and I mean, just real success stories out
Absolutely, absolutely.
there. And I know I was told one time. I think I told you I adore Sterling Peebles, and she's been on my show. And her mom said to me, "Well, you took the time to get to know her." Because once you get to know her, and we had a show the other night on a TBI. I had a friend of mine who has a TBI, and she was talking about her struggles, and you just have to stop and get to know them, which I guess is why I asked that question about the. And
Yeah.
I'm glad they're open their arms and accept them, because you just
Absolutely.
have to spend the time to get to know them.
So it's interesting. Here's a great real example about how you could use progressive employment. So this woman that you know has a TBI.
Yeah.
Oftentimes for folks with TBIs, a real frustration area is they can't do what they used to do, but they
Right.
think they can, and it's very frustrating.
Right.
What we can do is set up a progressive employment experience so they can go and find out what they really can and can't do
Wow.
now. And we get that feedback directly from the employer,
Right.
and then you can help work with the person
This-
around
This young
getting
lady
back
actually
in
has
space.
a college degree,
Absolutely.
and when she's got she just
Yep.
struggles a little
But
putting it in
again,
the right
there
order.
is a
but-
fit for her.
Right.
The trick is to test out different scenarios to see where that fit is.
Yep.
And that's really where progressive employment comes in.
Absolutely.
It's a cool model. So, what does it mean to be part of the Learning Collaborative? I understand there's two pieces to it. There's the training center, on
right.
the demand side strategies, as
Yes.
well as the Institute for Community Inclusion. What are
Great.
those components?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
didn't know
great
what they were
question.
either
So
area.
this is related to, so we had started doing progressive employment probably 3 or 4 years into it. We were approached by UMass Boston Institute for Community Inclusion
Right.
about this model. They were hearing about it. They were seeing some of the successes we were having with employers and the outcomes we were getting.
Right.
Really, I mean, we have the highest per 100,000 in outcomes of any VR agency in the country.
Good for you.
So people are looking at us and saying, how do you do that? And one of the ways we do it is through progressive employment. So we were approached by ICI, and we applied for and received a grant to actually take the progressive employment model and introduce it in several other states around the country. Because we knew there were variations in how VR agencies operated. We were housed differently, our funding structures were different, even
Yeah.
our financial stuff was different. So we began working with several other states, Oregon, Nebraska, Florida, Maine, and I traveled to these states and worked with some of the researchers at UMass Boston to introduce
Right.
progressive employment in those states. And we've seen some really amazing outcomes in those programs as well. The Blind Agency in Oregon has seen their outcomes go through the roof. Again, people think about a person who is blind and they immediately think they can't do this work, and we
Right.
can show them, oh yes they can. With the right assistive technology, they can do quite a bit. So there was a lot of interest nationally, and in fact, we're now looking at potentially some funding to do a true random control treatment trial of progressive employment in 1 or 2 other states, which is very exciting. We want to get to a place where we can say that progressive employment is an evidence-based practice based on a true RCT trial,
Right.
which is
And
exciting.
so where is that? Because I know on your website you have and you just mentioned them, I think, Nebraska, Maine, Oregon, Florida, and the Florida Division of the Blind.
Correct.
And they had some great stories on there about what they're doing.
Yeah, and
so
Oregon Blind
something's
as well.
catching on,
Yep,
thank God.
and in fact, Kansas has a big initiative now called End Dependence Kansas, and one of the models that they're using there is progressive employment. So it's yet another state that heard about this work and
And I'm
decided
just thinking,
to take
for
it
the
on.
client, it's not so scary. Because they
Yeah.
can work at their own pace, they can, as they feel accomplished, and so they can move up, and
Yeah,
that's
so-
a great thing
so
for them
sure.
too, isn't it? Because
Sure.
I would think if
Great
they were
point.
expected to do all of this by, 4 o'clock, they might back off a little bit and,
Right.
and not
Very
be
true.
as successful.
Yeah, no,
That's a-
career exploration is a big key of it, and
Yeah.
that's again a conversation with the business. Is how do you help your current incumbent workers explore additional career tracks
Right.
within the business? Well, they want to grow individuals, obviously. We can also talk to individuals being served by Voc Rehab around specifically career exploration. What's your thoughts around it? Have you ever done it before? Well, no, I wouldn't know where to start. We'll help you start. And part of that conversation is we're going to introduce you to a few employers who have been where you are and want to help you along that path. They may not be the right match for you, but their feedback around your resume or an informational interview or just a tour of a facility, you can now start to gauge environments. That's all career exploration. That's a big piece of it.
I would think it's not a good match is an important message as well, because
Yeah.
I'm sure they've been rejected sometimes, and they need to know that's okay. It's not a good fit. It's okay. It's not your fault or the employer's fault.
No, absolutely.
It's just
Yeah, for progressive employment, there's really 2 core underpinnings of progressive employment. One is this notion of fear, right? So we want to get at that, reduce
Right.
that perceived fear or risk on both the part of the employer and the individual, right? Because the individual may be just as scared to
Right,
even try
sure.
this. And the other one is momentum, and that's one thing that we see
Oh.
happen a lot. So we may start somebody off with just a job shadow where they go in for a couple of hours and just watch and see
right.
if that's even a fit just based on that, initial exposure to it. And then we'll build on those successes incrementally. So we may take that job shadow and extend it for a couple of days, and now you get to really take a look at different positions in that company.
Right.
And then we may go to a short work experience where actually you're doing some hands-on under close supervision, but you actually get your hands on it and do it.
That's great.
And what we find is as people sort of build successes, they also build momentum.
Right.
And we've seen people, literally, we had a young man in the northern part of the state who had such anxiety disorder that he was staying in his room and being left food at the door by his
Oh,
parents so that he
God.
could grab the food and eat it.
Yeah.
And we started with this gentleman and actually got him to go out of the house and just go walk through a store, a retail
Right.
store, just to see it. And then we debrief it and talk about what did you see? Is that an environment that felt right to you? And he said, yeah, that wasn't so bad. And so we incrementally started moving this young man forward through a variety of work experiences and then an on-the-job training. And this young man now is training other people in that store. He's a manager in the store.
Oh, I love it.
And again, this is someone who was
Yeah.
really severely
How
disabled
awful
by
for
anxiety.
him to be in that mindset.
Terrible.
I don't think
Terrible.
I'd be
But
able to.
but if we had gone to him and say, hey, we've got a 30-hour-a-week job for you right now. Are you ready?
Oh, he would just,
No,
right.
I'm not
He
going
would
to
have
do it.
walked out.
Lock the door.
Yeah.
Lock the door.
There's this
Precisely.
Right.
concept called the Overton window, which is changing your perception, moving incrementally moving what the perception of normal is.
What did you
And
call that, Ben?
The Overton window.
Overton window.
Yeah, it's-
Sounds like exactly what
Is
progressive
it, this,
employment
and this
does.
is exactly the same principle that you're talking
Yep.
about is, moving his perception of what was normal. Right?
Where would they
So
apply that? Where would that be applied?
it's. I mean, you can apply it really in anything related to psychology, but you know, it's changing a perception,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, sure.
And
It's
then
interesting because it
slowly
may
over
be,
time.
in the case of progressive employment, it may be changing your perception of what you fear.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of moving that incrementally
Well, and
further
you
away.
can
Boil
apply
this
that
down.
right to the employers also.
Yes. Oh,
It's
absolutely.
incrementally changing
Yeah.
that paradigm of being afraid of, you know, potentially, you know, someone who may approach work differently, or who you have a different perception
Right.
of because, you know, they need some extra
Well,
help.
this is
That's
another
great.
very interesting aspect that we found through progressive employment, and that is, it's a great way for us to approach an employer we've never spoken to.
Yeah.
Right, because you want to make sure that you get it right, because you don't want to lose that new business, right? You don't
Right.
want to lose their business, so to
Right,
speak.
right.
So if you can come to them with a model that says, this is a try before you buy model, and we are both clear up front, we're not sure if it's a fit, but we're going to give it a try, then there's no downside if it doesn't work out.
Right.
Right, and so you haven't really ruined the relationship if it doesn't work out, which is fascinating.
Do you get any pushback from employers on like, oh, this is almost too good to be true? Because you hear you know, you get to try out an employee before, you know, before you hire them.
What's the
Or pay
catch?
for them.
And right, what's the catch?
What's the catch?
And
Right.
someone else is paying for it. Like, how does, you know, what's the catch? I guess do you get that kind of pushback from the employer, or what are the kind of the sticking points?
Well, you know, there are many employers who will say, I want to make sure that I'm being fair to this individual. I don't want to be seen as taking advantage of this person. And that's when we take the time to explain that this is really, again,
Right.
no different than them going to a technical education program. You're just the instructor now.
Right.
And you're here to help them build their skills and at the same time assess whether or not they're a fit for your company. But there are employers who will say, you know, I'll do this work experience, but I want to put them on payroll. And if they do, that's
Wow,
fine.
great.
Yeah,
Good
that's
for the
great.
program.
And it's actually
More
there's a
money
model.
to spend on somebody else.
Well, and we have an on-the-job training model, which is exactly how it works. You hire the person, you put them on payroll, and then we can reimburse you for a portion of your additional training costs
Right.
to train
Oh,
that
great,
individual, so
great.
that extra time that a
Right.
supervisor may need or whatever. So there are places we can fit it in, but for the most part, employers, yes, their first reaction is, what?
Yeah.
I can try somebody
What a
before I make a hiring decision? And when we say, yeah, that's what it is, then frankly, they're all in. And once what we've found historically is once the business tries this, then they are wide open.
Right.
And then our challenge becomes explaining that this isn't for all of our customers. This is for a subset of our customers. We also have folks who are ready to compete right now. And we want to be able to introduce you to them as well. So
Right.
not everybody comes into employment through progressive employment. I think we only use it for about 15% of our total
wow.
caseload.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
So
I
it's
didn't know
not
that.
even that.
No,
that
we use
high.
it in a targeted way for the toughest to place
Interesting.
individuals. And in fact, Mathematica just did a regression analysis of our caseloads for the past several years, looking at progressive employment specifically. And what they found was, even though we were using it for the toughest of the tough cases, the outcomes were actually better than they were for our general caseload. Which is
Interesting.
fascinating, yes.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So it works.
So do you have a pool, I got to imagine you probably have a pool of individuals that probably aren't ready for the workforce yet, and is that kind of like in a training pool, getting them training opportunities
Absolutely.
and
So
things like
again,
that?
I mentioned we use progressive employment for different scenarios. One of the scenarios is to actually build skills.
Yep.
And so a person says, well, I'd really like to work for a veterinary office someday. We approach a veterinarian, we ask them if they can provide a work experience for this person and actually
Excellent.
upskill that person during that experience. So then they're competitive to go out and work in the industry.
Right, because the first time might not be the right fit, you might not have the right skills. The second time maybe they will. And maybe
Or
it's a
you
good
may
fit.
discover being a vet tech is not for
Or
you.
is not
Right.
Oh, right,
Not for me,
Because you
right.
realize
Right.
part of it is putting down animals.
Yeah,
and for
right,
some
right.
folks, they discover that,
Yeah.
right? And they say, whoa, I didn't
Wasn't
understand
all about
that
saving,
part.
right?
Right.
So part of this sometimes is, and particularly for young people when we use progressive employment, it's about discovery and finding what works for you and what doesn't. And
Right.
some kids have this perception of, oh, well, I'd love to work in X. And then they go in and experience it and they're like,
well, maybe
whoa,
not.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But it's better to discover that
Right.
up front
Right.
than to try and place them into employment in that career
Sure,
area and
spending
have it
money
fall
and
apart.
time and
Precisely,
Yeah.
precisely.
Is the Reach Up program still under your, is that the Reach Up is sort of gone, or is that still in effect, Reach Up program?
The reach up's alive and well.
Because I was just thinking, when I first went to the Department of Human Resources, I think about a third of my employees in the department were through the
Yes.
Reach Up program.
Yes,
And they
that's
stayed in
right.
state government, successful, became
Yeah.
directors and.
That's the old VCOP
Yes,
program.
VCOP, exactly. I was
Which-
trying to remember
Which
that.
was progressive employment in nature.
Oh, no
when
kidding.
you think about it, those
Well, it
folks
was
were
very
getting
successful.
experiences as part of their grant, they were getting these experiences
Yeah.
in state government jobs, mostly in administrative roles.
Yeah.
But many of those young, primarily women, ended up in leadership roles
Yeah,
in state
right,
government
yes.
over
And
time.
one person in particular, I won't mention the name, but she and I became really good friends, and she is a superstar in state government. Amazing.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
she's very proud to say she comes from the Reach Up program.
Sure.
And I
Yeah.
thought, wow.
So
how
Reach
cool.
Up is part of what
Oh,
we
is
do.
it?
That's
Oh.
in economic services, but the business account managers are representing the Reach Up participants
Great.
as
Oh,
well when they're
thanks.
talking
Yep.
to
Because I haven't
employers.
heard people talk about it much, but I'm not in state government, so I don't hear about it. So how many people in state government, I mean, you said outside of Voc Rehab, who else is it? It's Department of Labor, and you mentioned some others that are all in on this with you, and do you work with state government to place people? To
Oh,
place-
absolutely. We
place,
actually thank you for asking
yeah.
that.
I mean, that's the
did you
biggest
set her up with
employer
that
in the
question?
state.
no.
Well, this is interesting because we actually have an initiative right now to introduce progressive employment to state hiring managers for the
Oh,
same
good.
reason.
Because it is the largest
Very cool.
employer.
Yeah,
You should
absolutely
set
it
an
is.
example. You should set an example.
No, and we've been working very closely with a fellow named Bill Mears. He works for state HR,
Oh.
and he's been helping us
Yes.
introduce this to state hiring managers. We've done several presentations to the state hiring managers
Great.
statewide, and we've had some nice successes already.
Excellent.
VTrans has hired a couple of folks. We've got some other people doing work experiences in different agencies.
Excellent.
So that's fairly new, but we're getting some really
Well,
nice
tell
success
them they should
there.
set an
Very cool.
example after all.
Well,
We feel the same way.
I agree. Forest and Parks was our Employer
Oh.
of the Year a couple of years ago.
Oh,
Won the
really? No
Spirit of the
kidding.
ADA Award.
Yep.
Excellent.
That's very cool.
A gentleman named Nick Caputo working for Forest and Parks, and he has, I have to say, shameless plug for Nick, but he has never once brought up any aspect of disability. He just wants to know,
It just makes it work.
is this person interested in Forest and Parks, and how can we work with the individual?
Wow.
He's just been a rock star for us.
Bravo, Nick.
Yeah, Nick's a
very
great
cool.
guy.
Good.
Great guy.
good.
V-Trans.
What kind of work do they do there? I mean, what's the
So everything
the
from
scope?
so like in Forest and Parks, a lot of it is park attendance,
Right.
doing work on the work site itself,
Grounds
customer
and-
service,
Right,
grounds,
right.
being at the point of sale, if you will, when you come
Perfect.
through the gate. He has a myriad of tasks, and he has
Excellent.
just always looked at the skills, and he says, I know what the parks need. I just need to know if the skills match up, or can I develop the skills? He's done both, and he's never blinked.
Wow.
Nick is really a champion.
Bring
of
him
ours.
out to talk to the other directors. to tell
Well,
them
and
how good it
remembering
is.
that state government now is competing in a really tight labor market with
Right,
everyone else.
right.
Yes,
Yes,
they
they
are.
are.
So
Yep.
this is, as I've been telling all of the business account managers, make hay while the sun shines.
Yeah,
Because
right.
right now,
Yeah.
the sun is
Yes,
shining.
right.
Yeah.
Every employer in the state is looking for workers.
Yeah.
For sure.
Literally
Yeah.
every
That's got to be
employer.
it has to be a good labor market for this type of thing because everyone is looking for employees,
But they still have that
Just
fear.
thought-
and they still
Yeah,
have that
fear is still there.
The fear is still
Tell
there.
them they don't have to use vacancy savings. You'll pay the people.
You know.
It's a good edge. They don't have to play the vacancy savings game.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
it's
a good deal.
our big thing is for Vermont to grow, obviously, and we're part of workforce development.
Yeah.
You need Vermonters working, and so it's a lot of hands on deck right now. But there are still individuals that want and should be working and
Yep.
have skills, and let's get those individuals working.
Exactly.
And to Hugh's point, retention rates typically higher, on-time performance, attitudes. There's a lot of selling
Not
points
much
here.
calling in sick either, right?
No, not really,
Always,
yeah.
They're always there.
Yeah.
So you have on your website, and you mentioned some of them already, the way they kind of get that feel, informational interviews, summer jobs for young adults,
Yep.
Absolutely.
company tours, which is a great way,
bet.
on-the-job
Love
training,
those.
job shadows, paid interns, and unpaid. So you really balance a lot of opportunities, and you can
And a lot of that
shuffle things
conversation
around.
is with, again, both the employer and the individual. What are they
Right.
ready for?
Right.
So the employer may only be ready to do an informational interview, and
Right.
that's fine. That's great, we'll take it.
Yep.
Because
Right.
what we'll do is we'll
What
put a
great
really
practice.
and we'll put a really great person in front of them. The informational interview quickly turns into something else. We can be
This
pretty
guy's
clever
good,
too.
yes.
You play that
That's-
game.
that's
great, Absolutely.
Play
that's
the
great.
game.
Yeah.
Cool.
So what are other states doing? Are there other states that are replicating this, or are there other states that have unique things going on that you guys want to try out? Like what's
Yeah, it's a
what's
great
what else is
question.
happening out
So
there?
as I mentioned, we have those pilot states that are doing progressive employment, which is great. One area that we have become very interested in, and we're actually working very closely with the Department of Labor on, is really how do we expand apprenticeship opportunities for
Oh,
folks.
right.
I personally love apprenticeship because you earn while you learn. So a
Right,
person can go
absolutely.
into an apprenticeship and start earning right away,
Yeah.
but be be taught those skills and get those credentials that
Right.
can really move them forward in their careers. So we're having some conversations with labor now about expanding apprenticeship opportunities for people with disabilities and expanding the scope and number of
Yeah.
apprenticeships available in the state.
Right.
So we're looking at things like a bookkeeping apprenticeship, production technician apprenticeships, which both VTC and CCV have a certified production technician certification that they can offer. So we're very interested in that because it's another avenue into employers. It's something they're somewhat familiar with, but it also gives folks a real leg up so they can start earning right away, which is really important. There's no lag. They're earning the minute they start their
Right.
apprenticeship.
And they've redone or not reconstituted the apprenticeship program in Department of Labor. They have
They've
a
just
new group.
Yes,
No,
they
I
have a
don't
new
know how
apprenticeship
new, but
team.
Yeah, they've really,
Yes, and we sit on the apprenticeship
Yeah. Oh,
team,
great.
so we're very closely
Perfect.
involved. And we actually co-wrote a grant for the apprenticeship expansion grant. We co-wrote with Department of Labor, and
Excellent.
we received that. So we're very excited. The relationship with labor is very strong
Oh,
right
good,
now,
I'm
which
glad.
is really
Glad to
wonderful.
hear that.
Yeah,
That's
it's really
great.
wonderful.
Yeah, one of the we talk about apprenticeships. We've been talking about them, Vermont for a few years now, and one of the really interesting anecdotes for apprenticeships and how effective they are. You look at Germany post World War II, right? It was an economy and a country that was totally decimated and was rebuilt through the Marshall Plan on focusing on public education and apprenticeship programs. They went from barely being in the top 100 economies in the world to the top 3 within a 25-year span, which is
Right.
monumental growth, and a lot of that is attributed to their apprenticeship programs.
Wow.
Getting
Interesting.
on
That's
site
fascinating.
with employers, learning meaningful skills,
Yep.
and they actually have a almost mandatory apprenticeship program prior to getting your post-secondary degree.
Oh,
So they actually have you go through and apprentice with a couple different types of companies
Nice.
before you settle on what your career
Yeah,
path
that's
is going to be.
beautiful. That's beautiful.
And there's a lot of reasons why that's been successful,
Sure.
right? Because
Sure.
people find things that are a good fit for them. And I've even, among people that I know or coach in career paths or, having those conversations with, I tell a lot of people, look, if you know exactly what you want to do coming out of high school, go for it. But if
Absolutely.
you don't know what you want to do, if you're
Right.
not 100% sold and committed to it, take a couple of years, go get some, experience out in the workforce, in an industry that you're interested in, see if it's a good fit. Because I know way too many people that have graduated with a
Absolutely.
4-year degree
Absolutely.
that take a hard left turn and do something totally unrelated.
Yeah, I read
to,
somewhere that
what
70%
they
of college
studied.
graduates end up in a career other than what their major
Yeah.
was in college. No,
Yeah.
really.
Because how many 18-year-olds know what they want
Right.
to do with the rest
Sure.
of their
Right.
lives?
Well,
they
and
don't
also,
even have any idea what's out there.
Right.
yeah. And the other reality is, you have 48% of Vermont high school students go on to post-secondary, but of those, half drop out within
Yep.
the first 2 years.
Right.
Yep,
What are
right.
we doing with
Right.
them?
Yeah.
And what are we
Exactly.
doing with the other young people
Yep.
that aren't going on to
Well,
post-secondary?
that's our discussion of tech ed, and
Well,
that's my
absolutely,
passion.
absolutely.
Always been my passion.
And so the beauty of apprenticeships is,
Yeah.
after 6 years, you can be coming out as a journeyman, making
Right.
really good money.
Yeah.
And by the way, you have no student debt, which
Right.
is burdening a lot of young people.
Can
Right.
I
coming
just,
out
I'm
of
going to
college.
can you, do you work with the granite industry at all?
Well,
Because they are desperate. They're desperate.
He was just in a granite shed
I was in
today.
a granite
Were
actually.
shed
you
today,
really?
yeah.
Good for you, 'cause you should meet with the Granite Museum board. I was on that for years.
Yeah.
They are desperate for people.
We know them well.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Tradesmen, and the
Thank you.
tradesmen, the skilled tradesmen.
Yeah,
that
they're
you,
like,
you
well,
can't really go to
construction.
school to learn the skills that there's no
Yeah,
other way
right.
than
It's on the job.
doing it.
Right.
And apprenticeships are not new in Europe. Remember, apprenticeships go back thousands of years in
Right,
Europe. I
right.
mean, the cathedrals were all built
Yeah.
by generations of folks apprenticing others.
Oh,
Yeah,
no
even-
kidding, right?
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
you even think
Oh.
about like the
Journeyman
whole
and-
social structure in Europe, right?
Guilds. and-
Right,
the
guilds.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you had to be a squire before you could become a knight, and things like that, where you on-the-job training
Right.
was
Precisely.
baked into the culture in Europe.
Yeah. And I know when I worked in the Department of Ed and talked to businesses, and in Department of Labor, they will pay. They just want somebody to come in. They will train you. They'll pay whatever.
Absolutely.
Just to get you to know
Absolutely.
their business.
Well, they love training you their way, too.
Well,
remember.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
they want to train you specific to their business.
Sure they do.
Yeah.
Sure they do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. So, There's just, well, go ahead, Ben, because I wanted to ask something. I'm dying to ask about assistive technology, but we'll.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit at the beginning about some of the tax incentives and the supports that are available to students. Or not students, but employees who are looking to get placed into some of these programs. The stipend that's available. What other incentives are there, both for the employees and the employers, that kind of sweeten the deal or help with some of those friction points?
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly for employers, there are some tax credits. We don't like to have that be the reason they hire.
Right.
It's really, it's perhaps you sweeten the pot a little bit with tax credits, but essentially there's something called the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, and it gives a tax credit to employers if they hire from certain target groups, and there's a whole list of them, everything from individuals with disabilities to veterans to folks on the Reach Up program. And the tax credit levels vary according to those populations, so I won't get into the details, but just shorthand, if Vermont Business hires a Reach Up participant, for instance, over the first 2 years of that employment, they can capture up to $9,000 in tax. And these are tax credits, they're not tax deductions. It's an important
that's
distinction.
money to them.
It's
Interesting,
money off the bottom line.
Right.
So if
Right.
you owe Uncle Sam $10,000 in corporate taxes and you've done this hire for 2 years, now you only owe $1,000 because you've got a
That is an
$9,000
incentive.
credit. So it's a significant credit.
Yeah, right.
It's not, what we found, the larger employers are not as incented by that, and they just say, give me a good worker. We don't want to deal with paperwork or anything else, just give me a good worker. Smaller employers in Vermont, however, they don't have HR departments, they don't have training divisions, so that tax credit becomes that much sweeter to the smaller employers.
Yeah.
And remembering that 80% of Vermont employers are 50 employees or less.
Right.
So we are very much a small business state.
Yeah.
I can imagine that, because your opportunity cost at a small business for having to train a new person
Precisely.
is a lot higher.
Oh, and turnover kills you,
And
right?
turnover
So-
kills
It drives me crazy. I don't think our legislature realizes the small profit margin that are small. I mean, it's pathetic.
Oh, and
Some
the
of
owner is
these
wearing 5
businesses.
hats. They
Yeah,
don't have
exactly.
an attorney, they don't have an HR department, they
Right.
don't have all
Right.
the things that the big guys have, and yet
Right.
they still have
And
to
God
operate a
forbid they make a
business.
mistake. And
I-
one of them, and
As a
there's
small
no money.
business owner, I can speak to that.
So
I wear a lot of different hats.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and it can be
Yeah.
very challenging, absolutely. And so a tax credit like that is attractive, certainly. But again, as I said, we don't lead with that. What we're leading with, to Nat's
Right.
point, is somebody with skills who's going to meet your needs and help your business thrive.
Well, you
That's
want
our
it to be
starting
a
point.
welcoming environment for sure, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So can we talk about assistive technology?
Sure.
Because I think Nat and I were talking before the show, but there's been a lot of changes over the years. I mean, could you talk, I don't know,
Huge.
it's so huge.
Huge.
How do you talk about it? But what sort of things are there available to help your folks?
So do you want to dive? Do you want to take
I
a
mean-
dive?
Well, I can start with some of the initial dive on it, and I'll let Hugh fill in a lot of the blanks that I'm going to miss for sure. But the AT, Vermont has, right at the good Lord, the Waterbury State Office Complex, there's a department, Assistive Technology now, and they have some great specialists. And it is what I consider one of the best kept secrets, I swear, in Vermont.
Really?
Because,
Another show.
yeah,
Another show on
yes.
assistive technology.
Another show.
you should.
have that.
It's unbelievable.
Very cool.
So they are consultants not only for an individual, but they can also help a business with us who's struggling with what's out there, because it changes literally month to month. So these phones, the iPads, they change the entire game. Something simple like a timer that before used to bring in a clock maybe and say, hey, you've got 20 minutes to do this, and here's what that looks like. You
Right.
can have timers to help people walk through their day. You have someone who maybe definitely has a hearing loss. You can text instructions. There's literally millions of options. I would never ever do it justice covering it, but
Right.
if you ever have assistive technology in, they will bring in the goodies and show you exactly what they do.
Oh,
You've got to give them
That's
a call.
a great show.
They will,
Oh, that's
you would have
fun.
a ball.
It's a fun program.
Yeah.
And
Really fun.
they have an exchange program for assistive technology out there on a website. Again, I'm not the content expert
Because
on
my
it. but
limit is the raised desk where everybody stands now,
Yeah, the
or they
Vera
have
desk.
those giant balls that people sit on, and that's where I come from, was that environment. But
Yeah, so
that was
it's
a while ago.
I mean, it's really, there've been quantum
Oh, yeah.
leaps in,
Right.
in technology, and what it's done is opened the door to employment for a lot of folks who historically
Sure.
weren't able
For
to
sure.
do that, right?
Right.
So I mentioned earlier a person who is blind. It's fascinating to listen. They have screen reader software, so they can literally scan a web page like you or I do with sight, except they're doing with a screen reader that's reading into their ear.
Wow.
And they can adjust the pace of that reading, and you wouldn't believe how fast people can listen to a web page. It's fascinating. But what it does is open the door to administrative jobs for
Sure.
people who are
Sure.
blind, because
For
they can
sure.
do all those functions just using that screen reader software.
Interesting.
So the Assistive Technology Project has both what they call low-tech combinations, or low-tech AT, and then high-tech AT.
Right.
And it's what the beauty of it is, if you're working with that program, they have a loaner program. So if you
Yeah.
want to try out an assistive device, you can sign it out and take
Right.
it home and play with it and try it and see if it works for you. And if not, bring it back. We'll try something else, which is wonderful. And then, as you mentioned, they have an AT swap program where, and we've done this with schools, where assistive devices are purchased for a young person and then they sit in a closet and never get used again after the student leaves.
Right.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we figured out a way to swap those assistive
Great,
devices between
great.
schools, so that you
Oh, that's
basically
really
save
cool.
that
Excellent.
cost
Sure,
and
right.
reuse,
Right.
reuse the
And they
device.
must have adapted cars.
You name it.
right?
I
You
mean, it's
name it.
unbelievable.
The list goes
Because, you
on
know,
and
Ray
on and
Burke,
on.
I don't think people, I don't know.
Oh,
you know,
Ray
he-
Burke.
Remember
Oh,
Ray
he's
Burke?
a
legally
legend.
blind,
He's a
and
legend.
I told him I took the job at transportation because I wanted to meet Ray Burke.
Yeah.
Because and his office was a hoot the way it was set up with
Yeah.
the big screens.
And no one knew he was
No,
visually
he's.
impaired.
I don't know if you know Ray Burke. He
No,
was.
I definitely heard of him.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, you have.
He was the
You
road
couldn't
guy.
deny.
He was the
yeah,
road guy.
and he was legally blind, and he did this. He got people all over the state, and
It was great.
He was amazing, wasn't he?
His weather reports on DEV were magic.
I know they were. The little potato bugs. That
Yeah.
There was one that he did that I was in tears for days about walking on the
But this is
wire.
again an
But-
example where there are people with disabilities already working in
Yeah,
workplaces
exactly.
all
Absolutely.
across
Right.
the state.
Absolutely.
I
already
think that's
in
an
the
important
workplace.
message to get out.
Absolutely.
And he was like famous.
Tons of
famous.
people.
Who knew?
Yeah.
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 So
He taught
one,
me how to milk a cow one time. I don't even. I don't think it'd be allowed on the TV, so I'm gonna not talk about it much.
I grew up working on a farm, so you know, I got,
Nice.
I got those bases
Yeah,
covered.
no.
All right,
You
beautiful,
know.
beautiful.
And you don't need to see what you're doing, believe it or
Yeah,
not.
exactly. He didn't, but I knew what he
Yeah.
was thinking.
So one follow-up question I have, because we talked about all the different programs that are integrated into this collective model now. One big one that I can think of that we haven't talked about is the prison systems. People that are coming out of the prison
Oh.
systems.
Glad you asked that.
That is a huge population that is
Absolutely.
looking to get reintegrated back into the
Right.
workforce.
Absolutely.
Is there any discussion or any thought about working that into a similar model where you can kind of take
Great
some of these
idea.
folks that are maybe coming out of the prison systems with skills, trade skills that they've learned while they were
Yeah.
there, and giving them trial run in certain businesses and getting that ball rolling. in
Yeah,
this
you've
type
been
of
following me
model.
around, haven't you?
Yeah,
I,
that's good.
I
This is
wish. This
interesting.
is,
A
yeah,
lot
it's
of
very
them work for
interesting.
DMV in the prisons.
Well,
they're-
yeah, because
they're answering
we're
our
fighting
phones with their
wildfires in
phones.
California right
Well,
now.
this is a great question. We are actually, so obviously, if you look at people in the correction system, there is a very high instance of disability, trauma, substance use, you name it. You peel
Mental
back
health
that onion,
issues,
mental
huge,
health
very high,
issues,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
name it. Peel back the layer, one onion back one
For
layer,
sure.
and you quickly find disability. So we have, in fact, done quite a bit of work with corrections. Several years ago, we had 6 offender reentry specialists that were working through the P&P officers, helping folks go out and find employment. That funding sunsetted, so we've been sort of scrambling to figure out how to replace that capacity. But we are having some very interesting conversations right now in the women's facility in Burlington about building pre-apprenticeships in the facility that
Interesting.
lead to
Oh,
paid
excellent.
apprenticeships outside the facility. And right now, we're looking
That's
at
That's really cool.
at the production
Yes.
technician
To start that,
stuff.
so to start that runway before they even go back into
Yeah.
society, you
And-
know.
and
They
even-
used to build mobile homes. Tiffany
Yes,
Bloomley's
down in Springfield.
yes, had that with one of the contractors. I forget his name, and I would
Yeah.
love to give him credit.
Yeah, Tiff's
Uh,
great.
Yeah, and they would put together model homes, and we went to the opening of a couple of them one time. It was incredible.
Yeah, so, idle time is death in these facilities, and so having some kind of a training opportunity is wonderful. We also talked about allocating apprenticeship hours to work they're already doing in the facility. So some of the women work in the food service
Right.
section, in
Right.
the house cleaning section. So
Right.
we're looking at also, can we credential them for those
yeah.
activities while they're in the facility.
Yeah,
But what's
totally.
exciting about this is it's really this notion of having a person have a connection before they're even released from the facility. And we're
Right.
even talking
That's
Somebody
about,
key.
to call on the
Having a
outside.
runway.
well, we're talking about having the Skype interviews while they're still in the
Awesome.
facility
Yeah.
with a
Great.
potential apprenticeship site so that they can have that conversation ahead of
excellent.
time. So my dream is when a woman and in the future men, obviously we would fall into this category as well. When you're released, you have a place to go.
Right.
So that, you know, on Monday you have a place to go and start your work or your training and you can move on that way.
You
They
said it-
say,
oh, sorry.
you know, a lot of people who study this say that the number one most indicative thing of whether or not someone is going to reoffend after being incarcerated is A, stable housing, B, employment.
Job.
Right.
You got
Those
it.
are the top two reasons
That
bet.
is correct.
that people are most likely to succeed or be successful after coming out of incarceration.
Yeah, we think employment is actually the way you break cycles of benefits dependence, poverty, generational
Right, for
poverty,
sure.
corrections involvement. You know, we have another very interesting project that we haven't even discussed, but we actually work with the Office of Child Support, and we have those non-paying dads come to us. They start with an
Oh, get a
investigation
job,
counselor
pay your bills.
who talks about some of the underlying issues that may be going on, and then we
Great.
connect them to an employment consultant and we help them find a job. And what we've seen is a 500% increase in employer-paid child support payments. So in other words, where they garnish it from the wages, and then they pay the child support for the individual, 500% increase
Wow.
in that program. So again,
Right.
employment is
Yeah.
critical to everything. It's sort of it's the foundation for
Well,
a
it
lot
also
of
makes
success.
the person responsible. I mean,
Sure.
they're independent. They
And most of these
Make it
dads are
some
not
sense
deadbeat
of-
dads.
Yeah.
They're just dads who
They're
have
just
had a tough
struggling.
time and they're
Tough time,
struggling.
right,
It
right.
really
And
is.
It's a way to connect with the community.
Yeah.
Work is a community connection.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
another way for you to connect to your community, whether you're exiting corrections
Yeah.
or you've fallen behind in payments. It's a great way to
Sure.
connect.
You were at a meeting that I was at with Jolinda LeClaire on opioid addiction. I'm just curious how that fits into,
So,
or shouldn't I
yeah.
ask?
You could probably do a
Is it-
whole nother show
Yeah,
on that.
exactly. It's everywhere, and
This is a
I
great
was,
question.
I was
Also.
sort of surprised to see you there, but I'm listening to you probably maybe
You
not.
see me everywhere, yeah.
Yeah.
So we are actually, through a partnership with ADAP, Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention, we're actually piloting in 5 sites having employment consultants embedded in the recovery centers and the hubs.
Oh gosh.
So that we're
is
going to people where
beyond
they're at
awesome.
and we help them find employment. So we actually piloted in some recovery centers a few years ago.
Excellent.
And it was tremendously successful. Again, the fiscal stuff was a little bit sloppy, but we have now reinvigorated that.
Great
We're
idea.
to pilot it in 5 sites for this year and then with an eye to expanding statewide next year. And the whole idea is when people are coming into these recovery
Right.
centers, particularly early in recovery, that there's somebody there to talk to them about employment. Because
Yeah.
again, similarly to corrections, recidivism in corrections, people going back and relapsing, oftentimes, if they have employment, the likelihood of relapse goes way down as well.
Right.
Because you're
Right, for
stabilizing
sure.
them in employment.
Yeah.
So, yes, we are everywhere, Pat.
Excellent.
In case
Good
you're
for
wondering,
you. Well, I'm
we are
very
everywhere.
impressed. Listen, we have a minute and 17 seconds left, so I want to give you the chance, both of you, to anything we haven't touched. Sounds like we haven't touched on a lot, but if there's anything you'd like our viewers to know about this subject that we've been talking about.
I would suggest that I go back to this every time when someone asks me to sum it up. It's about relationships. The relationships we have in our labor markets, the relationships we have with those customers that we're serving, and how we can create a relationship for those two parties to meet. Once you start a relationship with anybody, stigmas, disability,
Right.
corrections, it all begins to wash away because you now know the individual.
Right.
And it gets much, much harder to say, oh, it's that guy over there when you have a relationship with somebody.
Right.
So that, to me, is the
Find out
bottom
he's
line.
a nice guy.
You
right?
find
Then
out
what
that
do you do?
everyone out there pretty much is just people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's what relationships are about. So that's where I'll leave it with
Thank
me.
you. Excellent. Hugh?
So for me, it's shameless self-promotion always. So
I'm shocked.
gotta get
it
the
would
plug
be,
in there.
if you want to speak to a business account manager in your local area, someone just like Nat who will service that particular geographic area, visit our website, which is
Excellent
for Creative
website, by
Workforce
the way.
Solutions. It's
Yeah.
called CW. Did you like it?
I loved it.
Oh, good.
I loved it.
We have
I'm
a
very
great
big
web
on
designer.
website.
We have a great web
Excellent.
designer. You're
It's
sitting
very
next to him.
informative.
You're sitting with him.
Yeah.
I'm the guy.
Oh, yeah.
So that
Selfless-
site,
shameless
that site
promotion.
is CWS for Creative Workforce Solutions, VT, all one thing,
You don't really do the website
I
yourself
do.
with everything else you
I do, and I also brought
Do you
some
sleep?
marketing pieces that I brought for you as well. But if you visit that site, there's a list of all the business account managers with their photograph and their
Yes.
contact information. If you visit there, you can please ask them to come visit your business. They love
Excellent.
doing it, and they're happy to help you.
Thank you both for coming.
Thanks
I
very
really
much.
appreciate it.
Gosh, it's great to
Thanks,
see
Ben,
you.
for being here, and
Thanks so much.
thank you
Thank you
for
so much.
listening
Thanks.
in.
Nice to meet
We'll
you.
see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.